Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 14th of September in the 37th week of 2012. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and Ron Szoke. We'll take turns suggesting an item from the week's news that's been ignored or misrepresented, sometimes even innocently perhaps, and then giving the others a chance to comment on it. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the 20 years we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true and will sound like it's from Neptune. Today is September 14th. On this day in the year 786, it was the night of the three caliphs. Not caliphs, that's a possibility. Caliphs. No, the night of the three caliphs, in that Harun al-Rashid became the Abbasid caliph, caliph of the Abbasid dynasty in Baghdad, centered in Baghdad, upon the death of his brother al-Hadi. His son was born the same day. Harun al-Rashid, once perhaps a good deal better known than he is now, as the Charlemagne of the Islamic world in the 8th century, a contemporary of Charlemagne's, and perhaps better known in the Eastern world, as we say, than Charlemagne was in the Western world. In fact, the story goes that Harun, the word is Aaron basically, Harun al-Rashid sent Charlemagne a clock, a chiming clock. And when it arrived in Aachen, in Charlemagne's capital, Charlemagne's heavy thinkers spent the longest time trying to figure out how it worked. They didn't know how the mechanism that had been put together by the court technicians of Harun al-Rashid actually managed to chime the hour, as it did. Harun al-Rashid, amongst other things, is also known as the caliph to whom Scheherazade told the stories that were supposed to be the basis of the 1001 Nights. As I say, in a better educated America, the America of the early 20th century, say, he was much, he was known, it was assumed by generally educated people. An example of this is that when Theodore Roosevelt was police commissioner of New York in a contentious time, the newspapers referred to him as Harun al-Roosevelt and expected their readers to understand it. And that comes up because on this day in 1901, President William McKinley died after an assassination attempt on September 6th, and he was succeeded by Harun al-Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, who became president, the youngest president, as a matter of fact, at that time, on this day. So you're listening to News from Neptune, the Scheherazade edition, in which we'll tell you stories, but they may not make you sleep well. And Ron Szoke will tell us the first one.
Yes, I want to start with a headline in the New York Times of a day or two ago. U.S. incomes dropped last year, Census Bureau says. The story is in a fresh sign that the country's middle class has yet to feel the gains from a weak economic recovery. Median household income declined last year to $50,054, a level last seen in 1996, the Census Bureau reported Wednesday. This income measure, adjusted for inflation, was down by 1.5% from the previous year. It peaked in 1999 when the median income for American households reached $53,252. So this poses then a challenge to interpreters of this figure. Two of the big ones I would expect would be it's all Barack Obama's fault, or to explain it away as essentially meaning us to poo-poo the obvious implications of this. And I'll look at the second alternative in a moment. The story goes on. Median household income adjusted for inflation was 8.1% lower than in 2007, the year before the most recent recession. The change in the share of Americans living in poverty last year was not statistically significant. There were 46.2 million people in poverty in the United States last year. That figure represents 15% of the population. So there are various variations, explanations, and so on. But I want to turn to an article by one Robert Rector in the National Review Online, which claims that this is insignificant. How poor is poor, he asks. Yeah. Yesterday morning, the U.S. Bureau of the Census released its annual report on income and poverty, saying that some 46.2 million Americans, 15% of the population, were poor in 2011. The poverty rate did not fall from the prior year, but remained at a near record high, the agency said. So the rise in poverty is 36.4 million in 2006 to 46.2 million in 2011, was due initially to the recession and now to the failure of the Obama administration to restore jobs in the economy. So again, he takes the first alternative, but then goes on to elaborate on the second one. The first being it's Barack Obama's fault. The second being this is not really very bad at all. So we start out with this atrocity story and then explain why it's wrong. What does it mean to say that 46.2 million Americans are poor? For most people, the word poverty suggests near destitution and inability to provide nutritious food, clothing, and reasonable shelter for one's family. However, only a small number of the 46.2 million persons classified as poor by the Census Bureau fit that description, according to his assertion here. So when someone is said to be poor, does that mean that they're indigent and starving? He goes on to claim that nearly all poor persons live in houses or apartments that are in good repair and not overcrowded. In fact, the dwelling of the average poor American is larger than the house or apartment of the average non-poor person in countries such as France or the United Kingdom, by their own reports. Most poor persons in America have sufficient funds to meet all the essential needs and to obtain medical care for family members throughout the year whenever needed. Where is this guy getting this? This is amazing to me. Some 80% of poor adults and 96% of poor children were never hungry at any time during the year because they could not afford food, and so on. Clearly, he says there's a wide gap between what the average American thinks when he hears the word poverty and the actual living conditions of most persons the Census Bureau defines as poor. In part, this is because the Bureau ignores nearly the entire welfare state when it measures poverty. So this is the line. It's not really so bad. These people should, that are called poor by the Census Bureau because they fall below the poverty line of their income, should actually be grateful for all that they have and what the big rich have allowed them to have, apparently. So how poor is poor? Some people, let's put this in context. And what is the appropriate context? Is it the global picture of poverty, the slums, and people dying of disease and starvation around the rest of the world? Or is the appropriate context American society? People judge whether they are poor or not, depending upon what they know about their neighbors, essentially. And every context has a context. So what's the appropriate one here? What's the proper perspective on this? These people are defined as living in poverty by the Census Bureau, according to the official figures of where poverty starts. There's no implication, it seems to me, that they would actually be starving or wandering the streets homeless or anything of the kind, but that's what this writer wants you to believe. So he says clearly, that word is always a sign that some dogmatist is at work. Clearly, X. Clearly, there's a wide gap between what the average American thinks when he hears the word poverty and the actual living conditions of most persons the Census Bureau defines as poor. In part, this is because the Bureau ignores nearly the entire welfare state when it measures poverty. Again, repeating that point. So it depends on your standpoint, I guess, where you stand on a lot of things. But are these people, is poverty increasing? Are these people living in poverty? Yes, according to the official figures, but he wants to discredit that point of view. So is it in the context of American society or the context of the poor of the entire planet? You choose, and then have some justification for your choice.
Thank you, Ron.
Yeah.
Comments, David?
Well, Robert Rector's been doing this at the Heritage Foundation for quite a long time. In fact, you mentioned 96, and it was around that time that I first became aware of this appalling sort of tactic. This was during the end welfare as we know it era, that his editorials started appearing in various papers and putting forth the idea that not only were the poor, and especially poor women, and especially poor black women, and especially poor black women having children out of wedlock, it was their own damn fault, and they were poor, and there was a culture of poverty, and beyond that, they're not really poor anyway, as Rector keeps arguing. Yeah. So it's a kind of a self-contradictory argument. This argument is actually, when you look at the world of foundational approaches, the Heritage Foundation is generally thought of as being right-wing, and it's pretty clear what they're up to over there. The Brookings Institution is generally defined as being centrist. And I started looking at a few weeks ago, or a couple of weeks ago, I started looking at some of the work of the people who tend to represent views about poverty at Brookings. A fellow named Ron Haskins and a woman named Isabel Sawhill, because their arguments, like Rector's arguments, increasingly pop up in mainstream sort of New York Times, Washington Post articles about poverty. So do Haskins and Sawhill are often quoted. And it turns out that Haskins' views from the centrist Brookings Institution often refer to Rector's views from the right-wing Heritage. And in doing so, he especially questions how we define poverty. There are certainly interesting academic, statistical debates about how we define poverty. The Census Bureau engages those debates in various ways, and is trying to, along with various social scientists, actually work at having a more accurate understanding and a more consistent understanding of maybe not what poverty is, but at least how much people actually make when you count in government transfers and so forth. That's fine, but to pretend that people aren't poor once they get government transfers, or even to argue, again, to sort of make a self-contradictory argument that the same people that are arguing against government transfers are arguing that those transfers are making people not poor. So do they need them or do they not need them?
And there's another distinction here that I think is worthwhile in trying to think about the problems underlying this. And that's the distinction between income and wealth. You began, Ron, by quoting the line that most Americans are yet to feel the gains, nice way to put it, of the post-crisis, maybe it suggests the crisis, we're not exactly post the crisis, economic situation in America. But once again, things are a little different if you look at income and if you look at wealth. The figures of the way in which household wealth has plummeted in comparison with the pre-financial crisis, for everybody, of course, except the very rich, whose wealth has gone up substantially since the crisis. I think we're boring someone, huh? Or they're boring us. I don't know. In any case, look, income. You can say, well, my income has changed remarkably over 20 years, say, but I'm still using all of it to pay for rent and food. So income in, expenses out, if they're roughly balanced, like Mr. McCauber points out, things are okay. But wealth has changed quite remarkably. We have this amazing decline in the wealth of Americans for the vast majority, and this even more astonishing acceleration in the concentration of wealth in the hands of the very few. Now, the second aspect of that, and the ones that we have talked about a little recently in some places, is the relationship of social well-being and inequality. It's been pointed out recently that much more strikingly than you think it would be the case, inequality makes not absolute wealth or poverty, so to speak. Inequality in a society makes for bad social outcomes. There's one famous study particularly about that. The names of the authors I never remember, but Ron remembers them.
Wilkinson and...
Yes, good. Wilkinson is one, right?
Yeah,
Inequality Wilkinson, you can find.
Yeah, the spirit level, it's called.
That's right. And it seems to me that we should try to look at wealth here. I've been saying for a while that we should be doing that when we talk about taxes, too. People say, well, we should tax rich people more, tax their incomes. My line has been, no, we're confusing income and wealth, and the differences here are much more stark, that the wealth statistics in America show us that what we should be doing is taxing wealth, and particularly investable assets. Well, not the wealth that's necessary to live, the wealth that you have to put in the stock market. And that the most amazing aspect of this is the fact pointed out by the economist Richard Wolff that an emergency 15% tax on investable assets over $1 million would make the deficit go away, and it would affect precisely 1%, the 1% of the American population. So income and wealth, we need at least to think about them together. You're watching News from Neptune. We are discussing the news of the week and its coverage by the media, and inequality. One more point on this, on what Americans think that you ended up with, Ron. You, I think, quoted the statistics a while ago that for most Americans, when they're asked about the distribution of wealth in the society, they give an answer which means they think the society is much closer to equal, much more equal than in fact it is.
Right.
The description most Americans carry around in their head is, of course, they're rich people and poor people, but this range, what they think of as the range, is far less bad than it actually is. The concentration of wealth is far greater than most of us know.
Yeah, a lot of Americans, according to these stories, believe they live in Sweden, but they don't.
Like Julian Assange.
Yeah. No, speaking of Sweden, though, one way to look at this wealth business, not just individual, but collective terms, and what the effect is of being poor in a society in which one knows, one could be relatively poor in a society in which has nationalized health care and nationalized pensions, and know that even if one is poor, one isn't going to be completely blown out of the water by getting sick or by getting old. And in this society, I think we have less. We do have obviously a pension system, Social Security, which the same people who are telling people they're not poor are avidly trying to get rid of or or privatize. But I think there's an increasing. I think it's easily arguable that there's a lot of stress felt by people the lower you go down on the social ladder in this society, and on the basis of the insecurity involved in living in a society without those two major sort of safety nets.
And as Glenn Ford has pointed out in an important discussion in Democracy Now! This last week, we have to note who is leading this drive to austerity in America. The most important line here being Barack Obama's exclamation that he's not getting enough credit for his willingness to cut Social Security and Medicare. The author of the Cat Food Commission, the man who appointed the Simpson Bowles Commission, he's in fact leading American austerity, and best his defenders can say for him is that he doesn't want to get there as fast as the other business party does. Well, perhaps, I'm not sure. David, you have another topic, something else we should move on to?
I have another and related topic. Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
You wouldn't have showed up. 80% of life is showing up,
yes,
as Woody Allen says.
Woody Allen, or even more. But it is related. Is about, I'm going to make it a topic about economic figures and so forth. I'm already hearing people saying, "Don't do data on television." Well,
yeah.
I'm going to have to, and I'll try to make it. Compelling. There's a new book out called "The End of Men and the Rise of Women" by a writer who apparently writes most for The Atlantic and Slate, named Hannah Rosin, Rosin, and it is getting. From what I can tell, it's getting a pretty good run-up. They had a long excerpt of this book in the New York Times magazine a week or two ago, and then there's a review of it in the New York Times just in the last day or two. And to top all that off, David Brooks wrote a column about it on Tuesday, which was what I had not heard about it up until then, but now I realize that people are going to be talking about the end of men and what is the end of men and is it really the end of men? And of course, given this panel, this should be an important topic, right? Are we looking at the end of men here?
Okay, it's not the end of man, it's the end of men.
It's the end of men.
Male.
Yeah, not the end of man.
Okay.
Men in the generic sense
Right.
will go on, but American men, as we have known them, are apparently over, as the current saying goes. And why is this? Well, Hannah Rosin has written a book which talks about the economy, the economic changes which have allowed and encouraged more educational opportunities for women and relatively greater pay, and beyond that, changed the roles of men and women. She focuses, apparently from the chapter that was excerpted in the New York Times, she focuses on a town called Alexander City, Alabama, which was the home of Russell Athletic Apparel for many years, and has seen a lot of changes because of changes in Russell and in other areas in textiles and so forth. I'm not going to make an overall judgment about this book since I haven't read, but after reading the excerpt, after reading a review of the book, after reading David Brooks's understanding of this book, which shouldn't necessarily redound to the person who wrote it, because who knows what David Brooks is going to say about anything, but still, I think I'm seeing a disconnect here between the common perception, as you mentioned before, Ron, about what people think is going on in our society and what is really going on. At the most general level, men, the median income of men has been stuck for a long time. We're not talking about family or household income here. We're talking about male income. It's been stuck for a long time. It's been stuck for about 40 years. It's been stuck at between $30,000 and $35,000, depending on how it's measured in sort of current inflation-adjusted dollars, men haven't gotten a raise for a long time. Obviously, that's complicated. Some men have, some men have lost, but median, not mean, median men are stuck in those low $30,000. Women, back in about 1960, in terms of current dollars, we can talk about women back in 1960 making about $10,000 when men were already making $30,000. Mean. Women, unlike men, got raises for a few years, a few decades, up until about 2000. Women went up to about from 10,000 to about 20,000. And since 2000, they've basically been stuck there. So when we begin to talk about women doing better and men doing worse, what we still have is a context in which men are still making, on mean, in comparison to mean, around 50% more. The mean male is making 50% more than the mean female. The mean male is making in the low 30s. The mean female is making in the low 20s. Certainly, a lot of women are doing things that women weren't doing 20 years ago, 40 years ago, making more money. So what does it mean? What could it possibly mean for Hannah Rosen to be arguing that women are doing so well that men are being sort of displaced and beaten down in the economy, when, in spite of the relative gains that women have had, women are still far behind men? And to me, how does this relate to a sort of feminist approach to understanding what's going on? We just saw the Democratic convention in the last couple of weeks, where a big deal was made out of the Lilly Ledbetter Equal Pay Act. Well, it's true. I support that. Women doing equal work should get equal pay, of course. But the larger question is, why aren't women who are doing different things from men, but who are having the years of schooling or the educational qualifications to do those jobs, why are they still getting paid less than men? Again, why are female, what are generally thought of as female occupations being paid less than male occupations? And all we have to do, all Hannah Rosen or David Brooks or anyone else looking at this article has to do, is look at census data, which are broken down in various ways. I tried to do this in a way that at least, that doesn't deal with race, because race has its own problems, obviously, but just looking at white males and white females, and looking at a young group of males and females between the ages, as the census does, between the ages of 25 and 34. One would think that the gains that have been gained by women that are being talked about in this book would be clear among this younger age group who have had the educational opportunities, the encouragement, and so forth. Yet, what we still see is that in every educational category, men are clearly, up until all the way through master's and professional degrees, only at the level of doctorate have female incomes in this age group approximately equal male incomes. And I will just run through it, and I will do this kind of like sports, okay? We're talking about various educational levels here. 9 through 12, men, mean income 20,000, females, mean income 12,000. High school grads, men, mean income 30,000. Women, 20,000. Some college, men, 31,000. Women, 22,000. Associate degree, men, 37,000. Women, 29,000. Bachelor's, men, 47,000. Women, 36,000. Masters, men, 55,000. Women, 43,000. Professional degrees, 58,000, 51,000. And finally, doctorates, women, the smallest, obviously the smallest number of people of any of these groups, 65,000, 66,000. So women are still way behind men. why at this point in time are we talking? I mean, it sounds like there's all kinds of, when Hannah Rosen went down to the city in Alabama and talked to people and talked about their changing roles and their changing prospects and so forth. There's a lot of interesting things that can be said about how men view themselves and just women view themselves. But fundamentally, I'm asking, why is there such a disconnect in this supposedly sort of feminist context as to the fact that women still are doing, that we're all doing badly, and women are still doing fairly badly, from what I can tell, in relation to men.
Got a take on this, Ron?
Sure. In part because they're willing to do it. The classical explanation was that women's income was a second income for many families. That's no longer valid, of course, and it will immediately be attacked. They are the sole breadwinner, the source of income for many families. But and to some extent, it's a kind of historical overhang. And then there's always this other factor that will enrage the feminists, I'm sure, that paper qualifications are not as important in a lot of jobs. They like to make much of their academic credentials, but there's a kind of consensus that all of the truly heavy, hard, dirty, and dangerous jobs in society will be done by men. And 98% of those killed in combat are male. 93%, according to the last figures I've seen, of those killed in industrial accidents or injured are male. And that, I think, is a factor in some people's judgments of the situation. Women predominantly have clean, light, indoor work. And if you're looking only at their paper credentials, the academic credentials that they have, it gives you a very different picture. But sometimes people look at other things too.
It would appear that, I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, go ahead.
It would appear, I mean, what you're saying, in spite of this, of the sort of, we've all been led to believe that there's been a decline of the working class white male in well-paid jobs and so forth, and that certainly is true. That's obviously true, right. But still, the data don't show that the data are still showing that it is, on the one hand, it's women have to go for more years of schooling to get pay equal to men with less years of schooling. So therefore, a woman has to get a bachelor's to make $47,000 on mean, whereas a woman has to get a bachelor's to make $36,000 on mean, whereas men who graduated from high school are still making $30,000. So it just, the numbers don't add up. I mean.
So you think there should be a direct correlation, there should be directly proportional for both sexes to the amount of academic credentials that they've gained?
I'm not saying there should necessarily be any prescribed reward for years of schooling, or that there should be some literal kind of idea that the more you go to school, the more money. The more either gender can argue that the more schooling you get, the more money they make. But the relative work there, at least there's just a disconnect here. If women think that, especially on the basis of this book, that they've made so much progress when they really haven't. And at some level, it simply isn't just. I would say that it's not just. Right. Not that it's just for men. I mean, the answers probably lie in justice for all rather than justice for women or men. Right. But somehow within this not justice for all, in which everyone is suffering and everyone's wages are stagnant, women are still suffering relatively more. And I think that's been lost in the feminist perspective, in some aspect of the sort of the mainstream liberal feminist perspective that we see now, especially as such was demonstrated at the Democratic Convention last week.
So this becomes a very tricky area. Actually, the last figures I saw indicated that black women had gained much more than black men. in income over the
Yeah.
past few years,
Yeah.
and so on. They are, in fact, the fastest rising demographic group in the income statistics and so on. But
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I sort of left out race because I mean, if you lump everyone in, I mean,
Yeah.
these patterns would hold if you lumped everyone in, but they would hold differently.
Sure.
But we're just talking, when Hannah Rosen writes a book about this, she's writing about white people. It's clear that she's gone down to Alexander City and she's written about white people. She's excluded black people.
Yeah.
And so, and that's a problem right there in her argument. It's clear that she's making an argument about gender roles for white people because those gender roles for black people have always been different anyway.
yeah.
It does seem to me to make a big difference, though, about the general context of jobs in this country. The last time we had this discussion, so to speak, as a society was a generation ago with the rise of second wave feminism and so forth. And in that case, we had a situation in America where jobs were plentiful. Now we have a situation in which, on various pretexts, Americans are being encouraged to fight over the scraps left over of the American economy, and with the outcomes that Ron was talking about at the beginning of the hour, that is the decline in income, the decline in wealth, even greater decline in wealth. And I must say that I've been surprised recently to hear a sort of resurgence, rebirth, one is tempted to say, of the second wave feminism in this new context. And it's concerning only because this way lies an identity politics that I think doesn't deal with the real problems that we have right now about jobs in this country. The abject failure of the current administration to put in the necessary jobs program that they should have done when they came into office, the sorts of things that the Roosevelt administration finally did in the last Great Depression, seems to me to be the real scandal, and the one that even, believe it or not, even the Republicans have discovered. And Mitt Romney is going around talking about the fact, well, Obama hasn't done enough about jobs. He says it because it's literally true. It's absolutely right. Not that he'd do anything that would be any better, of course, but let that be. The important point here is that the federal government is not dealing with the jobs crisis at all, and the jobs crisis is very real. Now, in that context, to start arguing about some of the issues that verge off in the direction of identity politics makes me a little nervous, I guess. I note that Rosen's second blockbuster article was an attack on breastfeeding. Yeah, she said that this has been oversold. People are saying it's it's good for the kids. It's not that good, she says. We really shouldn't get so excited about it. So she clearly wants to be contrarian in certain ways. The question is, of course, is she right? And is there a sense in which we can talk about the decline of men? I'm not sure. Let's see. We will remind you are watching news from Neptune, and we have a number of things on the agenda for today. I will say, David, when you began by saying "don't do data on TV," I heard it as "don't do data on TV," and expected, began to think of Ron's Funny Hats or something, and so surreality is only just off stage there, right, I think. Right. I don't know.
Yeah. Do we support the silly party or the sensible party?
Yeah. I think that may be what we're coming down to. I have a couple of things that I wanted to mention, if it is my turn. And as usual, I don't know
Okay, it's your turn.
Well, the problem is, as usual,
yeah.
Are you going to be a policy wonk and start quoting numbers at us?
I wouldn't dare. Certainly not after both you gentlemen have done such a nice job of doing it to start with. We will do some data on TV, but I will say that I was surprised this last week to see the media, including the local media, actually begin talking about justifications for killing people in the Middle East. This was interesting. This was before the contretemps, the contretemps that's blown up supposedly about the movie about the prophet. I think, in fact, what we're seeing in the Middle East has little or nothing to do with that, but that is another matter, and then we try to sort that out later. What I was surprised at is that both our local newspaper and the leading British newspaper published long articles this week about the reasons for the war in Afghanistan. Now, that's new. We haven't heard much about that before, I will say that the one that the News Gazette published was a summary from the Associated Press, and therefore is not to be taken too seriously, except as an indication of what the major propaganda line of the United States is on its war. But I was surprised to turn the page, to the op-ed page as a matter of fact, and see in the News Gazette, why are we still in Afghanistan? I was reminded of Norman Mailer's little novel, Why Are We in Vietnam, from long, long ago, in which he codified a question that was in the national consciousness on the example once, or as an example once again, of the fact that poets often get there first. But here's the AP, imitating Norman Mailer, and what they said was even more surprising. U.S. troops are still in Afghanistan nearly 11 years after they invaded. Why? The answer boils down to one word. Wait for it. Al-Qaeda. The goal is, I'm not making this up.
Isn't that two words?
I guess it is. The goal is to damage the terrorist group enough to prevent a repeat of the 9/11 attacks. That's what we're doing. That's what it's all about. We're trying to stop 9/11. Now, this is fatuity to such a degree that it takes, the British equivalent, the British Minister of Defense, to gussy this up and make it a long and difficult account of exactly the same point, which is what he did on the front page of The Guardian this last week. It's the same argument, the argument that the AP reduces to one line, but goes on for many, many columns, which the interesting point here was that it was in support of a decision by the British government to withdraw its troops faster from Afghanistan, but still had to explain why it was important that they were there in the first place. All right, look, this is a discussion we should be having. It's true the most important thing the federal government does is kill people, and when they do it with the sort of savoir-faire that the Obama administration is showing, we should ask them to justify what they're doing. We haven't been doing this, and that is our failure. In the process of doing this, the Obama administration has come on to amazing violations of the Constitution that I really would have said would not be possible if you'd asked me this at the time of 9/11. And we had examples of it this week in which the NDAA, the general law which provides for the indefinite detention, an obvious violation of the Constitution, of whoever the president wants to detain indefinitely, was actually struck down by a New York court, by a New York judge. Everyone agrees that it'll be a slight bump in the road for this power that Obama claims inheres in him regardless of whether the law exists or not. And at the same time, on the same day, the Congress, the House, passed an extension of the warrantless surveillance bill, which flies in the face of the constitutional provisions about unreasonable search. So we have two discussions of two major violations of the Constitution that this administration has undertaken this week. And at the same time, we're told that, of course, it's important that Mr. Obama be reelected because of what a new president a Republican president might do in appointments to the Supreme Court. Now, at this point, the red herring line, the red herring smell had gotten so strong that I had trouble, bringing us back to this explanation about why we were in Afghanistan. But I did recall that in the important case of Hamdi versus Rumsfeld in 2004, the very model of a modern conservative judge, Antonin Scalia, wrote as follows. I'm quoting now Antonin Scalia with reference to this massive unconstitutional behavior by the current administration. Antonin Scalia, in dissent, by the way, in this case, wrote, "The very core of liberty secured by our Anglo-Saxon system of separated powers has been freedom from indefinite imprisonment at the will of the executive," close quote. Now, Scalia is writing in 2004 here now, and this had to do with imprisonment of a supposed terrorist during the Bush administration. But the fact that this is coming not from our liberal Supreme Court, not from the appointees of Democrats, but from the extreme example of the right-wing Supreme Court, makes me wonder whether those who want to defend the vastly unconstitutional actions of the present administration are really happy with their argument of saying, well, of course, whatever else he might have done, at least he wouldn't appoint bad judges to the Supreme Court the way Mitt Romney does. Is that right? I don't think it is. Gentlemen, how do you feel about the Constitution this morning, this afternoon, this evening?
Yeah, it's okay.
Spoken like a Democrat.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to go off in a different direction and get some opinions about.
Well, can I have one? Let me have another crack at the Constitution, then, so to speak, just like Mr. Obama. This is a local footnote to what I was just talking about. We have we're in a peculiar position here in this congressional district of having a Republican member of the House of Representatives who actually voted against some of the worst unconstitutional actions of this administration and has voted against money for war in the Middle East. He's leaving office. The Democrat who is in a position to replace him has run for this job a number of times before. His name is David Gill. He's running for it again. And after the vote in the House this week on the surveillance matter, the violation of the Fourth Amendment, I noted that our incumbent congressman voted against that. He was one of 7 Republicans, only 7 Republicans voting against it, whereas, of course, 74 Democrats voted for this unconstitutional surveillance. So I sent a note to the Gill campaign. Actually, I pasted a note on their Facebook page and said, look, Representative Johnson has voted against this, as he does typically, but 74 Democrats voted for it. Which would you have done? The Gill campaign erased my comment. I've tried this a couple of times before with the Gill campaign, asking, will you vote the way the current representative does on war questions? And the result has been the usual crashing silence. Here we have it again.
I think what we have in the Gill campaign, I suspect, or I have suspected for quite some time, is an unwillingness to challenge the sort of the conventional wisdom of the Democratic Party
Bingo.
On issues of foreign policy.
Yep.
To a certain extent, they do challenge them on issues of domestic policy, especially health care.
If they hold on to the Medicare for all thing.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
Yes.
But so I don't have high hopes for Gill, and it seems like if he came to terms with these issues and just sort of wanted to let it all hang out and let people know what he thought, and it's kind of like, say what you think and people will vote for you or not vote for you. Okay, you win, you lose, get on with your life. either way. But I don't understand all this sort of hedging around and sort of playing. I mean, I understand its politics, I understand its strategy, but it seems like after having run for Congress this many times, and especially in this context in which most people are opposed to the war in Afghanistan and opposed to the violations of the Constitution, I don't understand why. I don't know if it has to do with the relationship Gil has or the hopes that he still has that he might get more funding from the National Democrats and so forth, which so far I don't think have funded him. I don't really understand why, if he really does feel that way, he doesn't just say so.
It's it is a bit of a puzzle. Noam Chomsky has said that, after all, when you think about it, if we are indeed a representative democracy, he doesn't think we are, what should happen at election time is that candidates should not tell you so much what they think should be done. They should come ask you what should be done. That candidates should say, okay, what do you want? What do you want the federal government to do on jobs? What do you want the federal government to do on war? What do you want the federal government to do? I mean, that's what they're being sent to Washington to decide on. And it shouldn't be the fact to say, just I'm a good guy, send me to Washington and I'll vote right on these issues. And we say, how will you vote? We say, I can't tell you now because it'll depend upon the issues, but my character is such that I'll vote right on it. Now, that's just backwards. What we should be doing is saying, we want to send someone to Washington who will establish a jobs program. We want to send someone to Washington who will establish Medicare for all. We want to send someone to Washington who will get the troops from out of foreign wars. But that's not the way we work. What we get is this persiflage about all the things, all the goodness that inheres in the candidate of choice, and please don't ask for specifics.
Could there be a reason for that?
Yes, there could indeed.
Why they keep avoiding that? Mr. Romney in particular, for example, is telling us that he's going to create all of these jobs and do all of these good things, and yet when pressed for particulars, it all fades off into extreme vagueness and ambiguity.
Exactly.
And of course, why politicians do that is that the instant they say anything specific or precise, they instantly make a lot of enemies, and they don't want to do that. So their line is always, I'm on your side, whatever that is, and I agree with you, and I support your values, whatever those may be, and they can get away with that for a long time. Apparently.
But there's a further problem. I mean, if we took Chomsky's method and people, candidates actually did go ask their constituencies how they should vote.
Look, the polls are doing that constantly.
No, they are, but they only within the limits of allowable debate. Only the thing. Do you want Obama's jobs program or do you want Romney's jobs program? And as you point out, both of them are so vague that people say, well, gee, I don't know, I'm not sure, and so you get a large undecided number. Now, if you ask people directly about these issues, should the government provide jobs for anybody who wants one, you get an overwhelming vote, yes. But those are not the polls that we take, and you don't even have to be the Rasmussen organization not to take those polls. That's, in general, those are it's rare that important questions get put into those polls. Okay, but there's a further reason for that, because what people actually want flies in the face of the needs of the 1%. And the fact that the candidates that are offered to us, Tweedledum and Tweedledummer, at most levels, certainly at the presidential level right now, the candidates that are offered to us are well within the acceptable policy limits of the 1%. That's why they're there in the first place. And the question is, how do you break out of it?
But beyond that, and back to the foreign policy, and maybe we all have a couple of things to say about the events in Libya and other places in the Arab world the last few days, but you pick up the paper this morning and people are in full throat about, they've got their patriotic dander up, they're chanting USA, USA, Obama is talking tough, the News Gazette editorial board is saying these people have to be punished, and oh boy, we're back into it now. We're back into the point where any politician who doesn't join in and say these people have to be punished, as if not that it wasn't horrible, but as if there was no context to this, as if we're not doing all the things we're doing in that part of the world and have been doing it, we're just we just love to get into this righteous chorus, and in the face of that, what is a politician to do?
But I suggest, David, that has far less to do with the native concerns, we might say, of the American electorate, and a great deal more to do about what you have to do in order to stampede that electorate in certain directions. As the senator told Harry Truman as they were trying to get the Cold War going, you've got to scare hell out of the American people. All right, hey, look, they're killing our folks. We got to get these people. This is the sort of jingoism, the sort of nonsense that our media are giving us, and so most Americans look at that and say, oh, gee, yeah, I've got to do something about that. A real public discussion of that matter would I suggest, would go in quite a different direction. And that was the threat, for example, of the Ron Paul campaign when Ron Paul was talking about those issues.
Who's talking tougher, Obama or Romney?
Oh, that's the whole point. I'm tougher. No, I'm tougher.
Yeah, right, right.
What is this, Romney strength? Is that the meme of the week? Yes.
Yeah, right.
This has been news from Neptune for September 14th in the 37th week of 2012. Our program is named in honor of Noam Chomsky. This has been the Scheherazade edition. Bedtime stories for this year's Bonzo, perhaps. And not particularly comforting ones, I'm afraid. If our program interested you, you might want to look for similar programs here on Urbana Public Television. I actually have several to suggest. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., the David Pakman Show. At 8 a.m., In Focus, Euro Swindle from Deutsche Welle. That should be interesting. Deutsche Welle is German radio service, and the Euro issue is on the certainly on the agenda. Euro Swindle, the program's called. I'm going to make a point of watching that. 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, News from Neptune. Hey, I'll make a point of watching that one, too. 3 p.m., the Populist Dialogues, Water Fluoridation. This is all Saturday. On Sunday, 3:30 p.m., the Populist Dialogues, the Fluoridation program rebroadcast. At 4 p.m., our friends David Johnson and Jim Iman on Labor's Worldview. Weekdays, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m., Democracy Now! They've been outdoing themselves recently, I think. 8 a.m., The Big Picture. Noon, The David Pakman Show. Note, by the way, on Monday, the Tom Hartman program will not be seen at 2 p.m., not at all this week, due to fundraising for Free Speech Television, which carries that. At 5 p.m. on Monday, European Journal, and also with the Euro Talk. That may be interesting, particularly. Tuesday, the 18th, at 5 p.m., In Focus, the Euro Swindle program again. At 7 p.m., European Journal again. At 10 p.m., Aware on the Air, starring Ron Szoke. And we hope we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune. Our thanks to UPTV, especially Jake, Jason, and Caleb. And we will return, inshallah, to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.